Hello, and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Jo Wheatley, and my friend and co host, Zoe Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. We're here today to talk to you about the risks of not being a coach. And by bringing you this episode, what we're doing really is starting to answer the question of why bother? What's important about training to be a coach? When we look at the changing landscape of the world of work and everything that's influencing things today, we thought we'd bring some thoughts and attention to what are the risks of not being a coach? So that's the thought for today. So, where shall we begin, Joe?
I think we're going to try and structure this as 10 different risks, because otherwise we could go off down various tangents. And we'll start with self awareness. So, what coaching does for you as somebody that trains to be a coach is it helps you to increase your own levels of self-awareness. So it gives you a structured, dedicated space to identify your values, like the things that are really important to you, to really, it's almost like an archaeological dig of your belief system. The things that you believe in that are helpful to you, and the beliefs that might get in the way or for you or interrupt your enjoyment of things. And what all of that means is if you don't have high levels of self-awareness, it can restrict your personal growth, but also your experience of the here and now. So we know there's lots of, as Zoe said, there's lots of different courses you can do. And we know that in challenging economic times, organizations will often cut budgets and reduce budgets. So really thinking about, the choices that you're making, where are you going to invest time to develop yourself? I think one question to ask yourself is, how self-aware do I want to be?
Mm. It's interesting that because I think it's also hard for many people to answer why do I need to be self-aware? Like, what's the benefit to me? And I think the first place I go when I think about self-awareness is relationships.
Mm.
And self-awareness is so crucial for healthy relationships because that, I mean, it sounds obvious there are two people, at least, in a relationship. And if you don't have an awareness of how you are being received or the impact that you're having or the impression that you want to have, it's very hard for you to nurture and build that relationship. And we can be talking here about romantic relationships as well as professional relationships. And I think one of the things that self awareness gives you that you get through training to be a coach is benefits in all aspects of life. When you think about relationships, you may go into it through a lens of wanting to build a better team or build better relationships with the board or whatever it may be that leads you to want to grow your self-awareness. And there is a ripple effect through your family systems and your friendship circles as well. And I think that is a really undervalued benefit of coaching training, is just the impact that self-awareness can have on all aspects of life.
Yeah, and really, this first one is an umbrella for all of the others, because the second area of focus, like the risk, is the risk around your emotional intelligence, and talking about relationships with others, but also there's the relationship that we have with ourselves and our understanding of what our emotional triggers might be. We all have triggers around different things, and being able to have empathy for ourselves, understanding, kindness, compassion, permission, acceptance of some of the experiences that we have, and also, like we say, that space to be able to explore them and what else could they mean, and what do
Mm.
I want to do with this? Do I want to continue to be in this pattern or this emotional pattern that we have? So when you think about being a leader or a professional, having limited emotional intelligence can really create situations where you might find yourself struggling when you're managing other people who come along with their emotions and their emotional intelligence. And that can impact the quality of the relationships. And obviously, in the roles that we have, yes, we have our own individual contributions, but we get stuff done with and through each other. And so
Mm.
those connections, and it's not about getting things right all of the time, but sometimes it's about being able to reflect on what we said, how we've said it, how it might have been interpreted, apologize, where we reflect and think, oh, I hope that didn't come across in that way. That, there wasn't, having the courage from that and to know how to express our experience, our reflections in a meaningful way, so that those relationships can be nurtured or healed or really grown.
Mm. And I would say emotional intelligence isn't just in the times where things are tricky and
Hmm.
difficult,
Hmm.
because emotional intelligence is also about nurturing great
Hmm.
relationships, and taking things even further and expanded ways of thinking, feeling, and being. I think it's very easy to assume that we are good at something when we can be great at something. And sometimes the difference between good and great, uh, has such an impact on, our work, our lives, the people that we're with. And so thinking as about coming to coaching and about the risks of not being a coach, I think it's the place where I go is about what's your unrealized potential. What you may be good at, but what can you be great at? And what difference would that make if you're able to step into that space? So I think that's a risk to all of us, that we never fully have the courage to stand into our potential and really lean into the edges which could, take us through doorways that we don't even know are there to be opened.
So I guess there, like if you're talking about when, somebody has feedback from their appraisal, for example, and they say, hey, you're really great at this, you make all of these differences and have all of this positive impact because of this. And it might be that they're still only doing that at 80% of their capacity. So it's not only thinking about training to be a coach because you've had some feedback that says you could really benefit from developing more empathy for others or whatever. It's at both ends. It's about developing your strengths, and that's what attracted me into coaching. Receiving all that feedback and thinking, wow, if this is something that isn't, feels like a natural area for me, I want to be the very best I can be at that. And as we all know, that's not a one-time, endeavor. It's an ongoing thing. So, number one is the risk of not developing yourself as a coach is that you go through life with a, maybe a relatively low level of self awareness, certainly not as high as it could be. Um, you risk not developing emotional intelligence. And if we don't have emotional intelligence, then there can be consequences to that. The third thing is looking at communication skills. So in coaching, when you train to be a coach, you really delve deeply into different levels of listening. Being very active in the process of listening, moving away, as we know, from listening to respond, but instead thinking more about listening to ignite. We look and explore different types of questions. We also look at how we might offer feedback. And we know in the workplace, feedback is an area where it's riddled with risk, I think. And it does require quite sophisticated levels of emotional intelligence, communication skills. And so, in developing your communication skills in a very advanced way, which is really what coaching is largely about, it enables you to avoid misunderstandings or misalignments that can occur, and give you the skills and the confidence to be able to lean into those and use them as opportunities for growth if and when they do arise.
I think there's a risk there around your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really talk about this in the workplace and in leadership, but I think many people, for lots of different reasons, have become disconnected from their intuition. And when I talk about intuition, it's like that gut instinct. It's being able to move without self-doubt. It's being able to make decisions without overthinking things. It's being able to, pick up on the subtle cues in a room, or the shifts in energy, or the thoughts and feelings, the temperature of your team, without needing to know where that comes from. And coaching, I think, reintegrates you with your intuition
Mm.
over time, certainly, and also helps you to help others to do the same. And you think about it as a risk, you can think about it as a benefit, but I think there is a risk to living life disconnected from your intuition, which opens up that risk of self-doubt and overthinking and sleepless nights. I think it's a very common conversation. And in fact, I was at a party the other night. I was chatting to some leaders, and many of them were sharing how, they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they start ruminating around the different decisions that they are a part of or the projects that are a part of. And I'm not saying that that's all about intuition, but I think intuition is such an undervalued and unrecognized skill in leadership. So, coaching can bring that back and help to sort of heal any fractures you might have with your intuition and start to recognize how useful that intuition is when used well. So,
Mm,
yes, there's a risk that you live life without it, but I think, to pitch it as it's a real benefit of learning how to use your intuition again, because I think we've all had experiences of using the
mm,
intuition,
mm.
but how do you start to listen to yourself and redevelop that self-trust to be able to move confidently and courageously into leadership or into new business or wherever it might be that you choose to take your skills and experience that you gain from coaching?
I think you gave a really like beautiful, eloquent description of like a relationship with intuition. I was like, oh my gosh, we should do a mini course on that. So, but also as you said that, I was thinking about, yeah, I was like, yes, it can be so liberating, reconnecting with your intuition. So liberating because it really can release a lot of the weight. And I think without it, you can play very small in life, not wanting to, maybe not even being aware of that as being what your experience is. But it's kind of once you're on the other side of it and you get to experience what is possible, in some ways, only then can you look back and realize like what you have been liberated from.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it's so powerful. And as you say, in many ways, that is one of the greatest gifts of training as a coach.
mm. I don't think this one is on the list, so Joe. So you'll probably,
Great.
yeah, grind me down later for that. But
I will
I
not.
think there is. I think there is something around the changing world of work. We've had conversations on the podcast. I know me and you talk a lot behind the scenes around what's AI going to introduce to the world of work. And maybe this is 5, 10, 20 years. But I think for me, when I look out to the future, I think the thing that's really going to differentiate leaders and organizations and groups of people are those who can connect on an emotional level. Like if we imagine a world where it's robots and technology and AI and lots of jobs have been replaced, well, there's still going to need to be humans involved in processes somewhere. And that sounds like a very dry, lonely, sterile environment. And I think those leaders who are going to be valuable are going to be those who can lead with heart, lead with intuition, and really be able to tap into how can you help motivate and inspire in communities, in workplaces, in all aspects of life. And coaching is such a crucial skill, even for helping people through what may be difficult times. If there are to be redundancies in the short term, if jobs are replaced, well, how do you help people through that process with integrity and with emotional intelligence and compassion? And I think coaching is one of the skills of the future that's going to support all careers across the board.
Yeah, and maybe as an add-on to that is, having a coaching mindset really helps you to uh, be aware of and focus in on and act on creating inclusive cultures, spaces, environments, and that feeling of belonging that I think people are worried about, as we go forward with all the technological advances and, the changes that will occur in what we know as like current workplaces. Having a coaching mindset it's almost like having the key to like the essence of life, which is we all want to feel that we belong somewhere to something or with some people. And I think when you have a coaching mindset, it also enables you to see more of those barriers that people can encounter or that you might have encountered yourself. and be able to develop an understanding about how they're created, why they're created, and what you might be able to do, or together what might be possible to be achieved in terms of challenging those barriers that have been built up over time. And as we move forward, thinking about how do we contribute to, being really conscious and intentional about what we create moving forwards.
Mm. It sort of gives rise to another one that's not on the list. It's
Hmm.
like going rogue.
Yeah.
And this is away from individual risk. So, we're talking about things about self. And I think me and you, we have these wide conversations, don't we? But what's the risk to the world of not training as a coach? And I think broader than that is just not enlightening your self awareness, not developing emotional intelligence, not being able to bring people together. And I think it is that loneliness epidemic. Me and you've sort of touched on this before, whether on the podcast or privately. And it is, as you said there, around fostering a sense of community. I've read in different places, sometimes the only real way to feel motivated is to help others. Now, I don't know if that's true for everybody. I certainly experience that when I am in service of others, that is when I feel most empowered, most enlightened, most of service. And so if we take it away from self and take that more sort of systemic view, I think if you are somebody who wants to build better societies, see more of a just world, like it can feel like a really small step, but training in something like coaching is I believe a genuine way to contribute to making a meaningful difference in the world. And so obviously what I would say is, in not training to be a coach, well, what's the risk? How else are you going to feed that desire? And there may be other solutions for people, but I know for you and I, coaching has definitely been that solution to feeling part of systemic change, even on a micro scale. It helps us to feel that we are contributing in a way that we want to, which in turn feeds our motivation and passion.
Yeah, I think that's all about, helping people to feel seen, heard, and supported, all the things that most people crave. And if people don't have that, that's when they often feel disengaged. They might leave, but they might leave abruptly or not in a way that they would want to leave, even if they were going to leave anyway. Or, you might get underperformance, in comparison to how somebody is capable of performing. And really, what Kate, in simple terms, one of the things that coaching does is it helps you to develop the ability to see through multiple lenses or multiple perspectives. Because when you're having a coaching conversation, we're having it without assumptions that we know everything about, the person. They're not sharing everything with us, but we're often helping them to step outside the intensity of the experience that they're in and be able to step outside of that and look at, like, what are the things that are shaping that person's experience of it. What are the beliefs that are informing it? Are they still relevant to the life that they're living now? And I think that what that does is it generates, or it can foster a greater level of flexibility. And so when it comes to problem solving, which is something we all have to do on a daily basis, at work, outside of work, often at the same time, a relentlessness in terms
Mm.
of problem solving, let alone the huge problems that we face as, on a global level. Having the ability to think through multiple perspectives, or, and that means different people's views or different versions of yourself, and views through that. I think it can also, that can also help you to stay in touch with a feeling of hope, or the possibility of change, that might be connected to that, particularly if you find yourself at a time in your life where something in your life, maybe lots of things in your life, don't feel like how you want them to feel. They aren't how you want them to be. And that's obviously related to stress and to burnout. And so coaching and being able to work through things. And I guess what coaching does is it can help you to work through situations in an accelerated way in comparison to if you hadn't had coaching training, because of the ability to see different perspectives, because of a greater level of understanding of your emotional sequencing, etc., etc. It can help to support your well-being. That your resilience, your ability to kind of bounce back from experiences, or to achieve the balance that you might eternally be seeking in life. And so it's not to say that you won't experience it's not to say you won't experience stress, because of course we all do, at different times. But in
I,
many
th-
ways, it is that sort of insurance policy that we talk about on other podcasts.
I think there's a piece there that I was thinking about when you were talking around. Yes, it's the ability to problem solve when things are challenging.
Mm.
And it's, I don't like the word superpower, but like to be able to problem solve at that superpower level, that's about gravitas, influence, impact, all things that leaders, I think, who are ambitious
Mm.
crave is that ability. How can I be seen? How can my potential be witnessed and noticed? And I think problem solving skills at the levels we're talking about through coaching, being able to see multiple perspectives, you take a helicopter view, look at the systemic lens on sort of why things are happening. I don't think there are many leaders who can shift between that. Okay, let's look in the detail and let's look at the broader picture. Let's look at the systemic lens. Let's look at the perspective of others. Those are really valuable skills when it comes to comes to who you want in your team, right? So
Mm.
I think there's that perspective as well around how problem solving can be kind of supercharged through gaining coaching skills.
I was also thinking back to your very first point, kind of looping back to that around self-awareness. And, when you've been a team member, managed by somebody else or led by somebody else, I think the leaders that people often respect the most are the leaders. They're not the perfect leaders, but they are the leaders who have a good understanding of themselves. So, that can say, I know I'm feeling stressed about this right now because of this, and I know that, and I know that this, and so it feels more real. So if you want to be a leader that people respect, you don't have the pressure of being perfect, but you are able to open those conversations, and have conversations with other people around how you're feeling. Like when you and I have conversations, we don't shield each other from the things that we're feeling. We'll share the things that we're feeling because we know that that will enable us to process through them more quickly. And that point about feeling seen and heard, and we also know that the intensity that we might be feeling in one moment isn't necessarily how we're going to feel about it. And through talking, and we haven't really talked about it, coaching is about talking, isn't it? It's about listening, it's about silence, it's about loads of things, of course, but it's about being present with another person, two people choosing to be together, exploring the unknown together. And that takes so much courage, but is so precious and special. It just really can help to reduce a lot of the noise that we experience in our day-to-day lives. And, that can be so valuable. So I believe I wouldn't be where I am now had I not trained as a coach. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think I'm able to sustain where I am now because of my coaching training and experience, which I,
Mm.
again, am really grateful for.
I'd echo that. And I mean, the topic of the podcast is the risks of not being a coach. And if I think about how life could have looked for me had I not trained to be a coach, and not just trained to be a coach, but then followed the path of really investing in my personal development, my mindset, I would just be a slither of the person that I am today. In terms of, confidence, self-doubt, not just that, but even down to the material things that I've achieved in my life, and the relationships and the friendships. So it's easy for me to sit here and say I can see a true risk of what my life could have been without it. Now, if you're sat at the starting blocks and you're wondering, or do I, don't I train as a coach? Should I, shouldn't I? It's a lot of work. Is it really worth it? I think you can only, imagine, really. Allow yourself to lean into what could life be. And we're all aware, I think, to a certain extent, of what are some of the obstacles or blocks that are in our way. What if you could shift those? What if you thought differently? What if you felt differently? And just allow yourself to sort of lean into that, because I think that is what's available when really invest in the coaching journey.
So, and I suppose my last line on this would be, was just thinking about maybe the greatest risk of all is if you don't invest in developing coaching skills, that you stay the same for your whole life.
Mm. Because
Status quo.
I think there's a lot of people who live that risk, you know. I
Mm.
think the final thought, Joe, is have we actually covered 10?
I mean, who cares?
There you go, 9.5. Who knows where we got to? But I hope you've enjoyed listening to us musing on the question of what are the risks of not training to be a coach. And if this has inspired you to come and find out more about coaching training, the best place to start is with our quiz, which coaching qualification is right for you. And you can find that at mycoachingcourse.com.